In 1817, a man named DeWitt Clinton convinced the state of New York to dig a ditch 363 miles long, 40 feet wide, and 4 feet deep, from Albany to Buffalo. Critics called it Clinton's Ditch. They called it a fool's dream. The state had no engineers, they had no machines. What they had was 9,000 men with shovels, wheelbarrows, and black powder. 8 years later, that ditch cut the cost of shipping goods from the frontier to New York City by 95%, and it made New York the richest city in America. I've been reading the old construction ledgers, the payroll books, the contractor accounts bound in leather so dry it crumbles when you turn a page. And the part that keeps hitting me is this: nobody cut a stone for DeWitt Clinton. They cut them for a canal that a generation of men said could not be built. And the men who cut the stones died in the swamps of central New York for a wage of 80 cents a day. Nobody put their names on a bronze plaque. I've been looking for those names. If you care about the men who built this country with their hands, the farmers and the Irish boys and the stonecutters nobody ever wrote a book about, please subscribe to Global Old History right now. This channel lives or dies on subscribers. Hit the button, then come back, because what DeWitt Clinton's crews pulled off between 1817 and 1825 still makes me shake my head every time I stand on the old towpath. Here's the part you have to understand before any of it makes sense. In 1817, the United States was 41 years old. The country stopped effectively at the Appalachian Mountains. West of those mountains was the frontier: Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, on the wild country up along the Great Lakes. Farmers out there were already growing enough wheat and corn to feed half of Europe, but they could not get it to market. A barrel of flour in Buffalo was worth maybe $3. That same barrel in New York City was worth $10. You would think a man could make a fortune moving flour, but to get it from Buffalo to New York, you had to put it in a wagon pulled by oxen at 2 miles an hour, over roads that were frozen mud in winter and soupy mud in spring and rutted bone-dry mud the rest of the year. It cost $100 a ton to move freight that way. A ton. That flour that was worth 10 in the city was worth nothing by the time it got there, because the moving of it had eaten the value. And that is the desperation that sat on the country like a lid. The farms were there. The buyers were there. The land was the richest on earth. But between them sat 500 miles of ridge, forest, and swamp, and no way through it. Men had been talking about a canal since George Washington. Washington walked some of the country himself in 1783 and said a waterway would be the making of the Republic. Nobody did it. Thomas Jefferson, who built Monticello and bought Louisiana, called the Erie Canal idea little short of madness. That was 1809. It was the President of the United States saying it could not be done, so it took a particular kind of man to try anyway. DeWitt Clinton was born in 1769 in Little Britain, New York, the son of a Revolutionary War general. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall in a country where most men were 5'6". He graduated at the top of his class at Columbia when he was 17. He served as mayor of New York City for 10 years on and off. He was a naturalist. He cataloged fish in the Hudson. He wrote papers on freshwater mollusks in his spare time, and by 1817, when he was elected governor of New York, he had been beating the drum for this canal for 8 solid years against every newspaper editor and every farmer and every politician who told him he was insane. They passed his bill in the New York legislature by 1 vote. 1. The federal government refused to help. President Madison had vetoed the money, so New York borrowed against itself. $7 million at a time when the entire federal budget was about $25 million. And on July 4th, 1817, at a little spot called Rome, New York, between the Mohawk Valley and the Oneida Lake country, DeWitt Clinton drove the first shovel into the dirt. And there was no engineer on the continent who had ever built a canal longer than 27 miles. The longest canal in America at that point was the Middlesex in Massachusetts. 27 miles. Clinton's ditch was going to be 363, more than 10 times longer than anything ever attempted on this soil. Which brings us to the 2 men who had to figure out on the fly how to actually build it. Benjamin Wright was a country judge from Rome, New York, born in Connecticut in 1770. He had surveyed land for a living before he put on the robe, and he had laid out a few short local canals for private mill owners. He was not a trained civil engineer. Nobody in America was. James Geddes was a farmer and sometime salt boiler from Onondaga County, born in Pennsylvania in 1763. He had surveyed a possible canal route in 1808 with borrowed instruments he did not fully understand, walking the ground himself in the summer heat with a compass and a notebook. Those were the men who were going to build the longest canal in the world. A judge and a farmer. They taught themselves trigonometry out of English textbooks by lamplight. They invented a wheelbarrow that one man could push up a ramp of loose dirt. They designed a stump puller made of a beam, a chain, and an iron screw that could tear a 40-year oak stump out of the ground in about half an hour. The whole design was sketched on the back of an envelope. I've seen a copy of it. The handwriting is tight and careful, the way a man writes when he knows the men above him are waiting on every line. Because here is the problem they faced the first summer. Up most of that 363-mile line went through virgin hardwood forest. Oaks 6 feet across, elms and hickories, roots a foot thick running 20 feet out from the trunk. Before you could dig a canal, you had to clear a path 60 feet wide through the trees, then pull the stumps, then dig the ditch, then line it with clay to keep the water from soaking away. Then build the towpath alongside it for the mules that would pull the boats. And then do it all again the next mile. And the next. Wright and Geddes set up contracts. They broke the whole route into 3/4-mile sections and put them out to bid. Local farmers mostly. A farmer would sign up to dig his section with his sons and a few hired hands. He got paid by the cubic yard of dirt moved. Some of those contracts survive. I've read them. The ink is faded to a soft brown. A man named Nathan Roberts, who later became a senior engineer, started out winning one of those little 3/4-mile contracts near Rome. That was the ladder. That was the whole way the canal got built. Not one big army. Hundreds of small crews working side by side all the way across New York State. At peak in 1819, there were 9,000 men working the line. Most of them were Irish. Some were local farm boys looking to earn winter money. Some were freed black laborers out of the Hudson Valley. Some were German immigrants come down from the old Palatine settlements. The wage was 80 cents a day and a ration of whiskey. Whiskey 4 times a day. A gill in the morning before work, a gill at noon, a gill in the afternoon, a gill at quitting time. That is about 12 ounces of hard liquor poured into a man over the course of a single shift. They drank it because the water was often bad, because the work was brutal, and because the foreman believed it kept the men moving. I want to tell you about 2 of those men. Because 9,000 is just a number, and the numbers never tell you what it cost. I pulled these names out of a Herkimer County burial register, cross-referenced against a contractor's payroll book that survived in a basement in Syracuse. Neither man ever made the history books, but they were here. The first was Patrick Donnelly, age 22, born in County Mayo, Ireland, on a tenant farm his grandfather had worked before him. He came over in 1818 in the steerage of a timber ship out of Belfast, paid for his passage with a note signed against his first year's wages on the canal. When he landed in New York City in July, walked up the Hudson to Albany, and signed on with a contractor at Utica by the first week of August. He could not read. He signed the contract with a mark. He was put to work at the deep cut through the Montezuma Marshes. That was the worst stretch of the whole line, 8 miles of black water swamp between Syracuse and the Seneca River. Cedar and tamarack standing in 2 feet of tea-colored water, mosquitoes in clouds thick enough that a man breathing with his mouth open would choke on them. And under the water, the mud was so soft it would not hold a ditch. Every foot they dug in the day filled back in by morning. The men stood in that water from dawn to dark. They dug with short-handled spades because a long handle would not clear the cedar knees. They lived in shanties of brush and tar paper built up on little islands of packed clay. By September of 1819, the fever came. They called it the Age, shaking chills in the morning, high fever by noon, soaking sweat by night, the whole thing starting over the next day. We know now it was malaria carried by the swamp mosquitoes. They did not know. The contractor's doctor dosed men with calomel, which is mercury chloride, and with Peruvian bark, which is the quinine tree, and sometimes with nothing at all because he had run out. More than 1,000 men died in the Montezuma stretch between 1819 and 1821. 1,000. In 8 miles of ditch, Patrick Donnelly caught the egg on September 14, 1819. The contractor's ledger notes him missing a day of work, then 2, then a week. On September 28th, the entry beside his name reads, "Buried near the line." He was 22. He had been in America for 14 months. He never mailed a letter home because he could not write one. His mother in County Mayo almost certainly never learned what became of him. She waited for the money that had been promised, and the money never came. That was one man. There were 1,000 in that swamp alone. And here is where the story turns, because you cannot tell this just as a story of grief. The men who survived Montezuma, the men who dug out of the marshes and kept going west, were part of something that had never been done on this continent before. And the engineering they improvised was as clever as anything being done in Europe at the time. The stump puller I mentioned was one example. It was designed by a blacksmith named Jeremiah Brainerd. I'm working off sketches by Geddes. A team of men using that machine could pull 40 big stumps in a day. Before the machine, the same team could pull 5. 40 stumps meant half a mile of cleared ground. The whole economy of the dig ran on that machine, and nobody had ever seen one before. It came into existence because a farmer and a judge needed it to exist. Then there was the cement. Hydraulic cement, which is cement that sets hard underwater, was considered the secret of the old Roman aqueducts. Nobody in America knew how to make it. The canal needed tons of it for the locks and the aqueducts. A miller named Canvas White, 27 years old, was sent to England in 1817 to study what they used over there. He walked the English canal country on his own feet for a year. He came back and realized that a gray limestone near Fayetteville, New York, had the right chemical composition. Burnt the right way, ground with the right proportion of sand, it set as hard as stone in running water. The canal used about 400,000 bushels of the stuff. Canvas White patented his process, and the government largely ignored the patent, and he died poor in 1834, 45 years old. And there were the locks, 83 of them, end to end. A lock is a rectangular stone box with heavy wooden gates at both ends. A boat floats in. You close the gate behind it. You open sluices in the upstream gate. Water pours in, the boat rises. You open the gate at the top, the boat floats out at the higher level. Every lock lifted a boat between 6 and 12 feet. String 83 of them together from Albany at sea level to the level of Lake Erie. And you raise a freight boat 675 feet straight up in the air, on using no power source except falling water. The stone for those locks was quarried locally wherever possible, dressed by stone cutters. Some of those cutters were Scottish, some were Welsh, some were local Yankee boys who had never touched a chisel before they hired on. They worked in lock pits, 12 feet deep in some places, in the rain, cutting stone to within 1/8 of an inch of specification. A lock that was out of square by even a little would leak. A leaking lock would drain the canal dry in a week. Before I tell you what happened when they hit the last stretch of the line up near Lockport, do me a second favor and subscribe. I know I keep asking. I wouldn't if it didn't matter. The algorithm buries old industry stories unless enough people click that button. So tell it. One click. Come back. I said because Lockport is where the whole thing almost fell apart. Here is what Lockport is. About 20 miles east of Buffalo, the canal had to climb the Niagara Escarpment. That is a limestone cliff 60 feet high running most of the way from Niagara Falls to Rochester. No going around it. The line had to go over it. Nathan Roberts, that same farmer who started out with a 3/4-mile contract near Rome 8 years before, was now the chief engineer on the Lockport section. He designed a flight of 5 stone locks, paired side by side so boats could go up and down at the same time. 10 locks in all, 60 feet of lift in the length of a city block. And before the locks could be built, a cut had to be blasted through the escarpment itself, 3 miles of trench, 30 feet deep, straight through solid rock. They had black powder. That was the only blasting agent on Earth in 1822. Nitroglycerin had not been invented. Dynamite would not come for another 45 years. Black powder is slow and unpredictable. You drill a hole into the rock with a long iron bit, 2 men swinging sledges on it while a third holds and turns the bit. A hand-drilled hole 3 feet deep took half a day. You pour in the powder, tamp it with a wooden rod, lay a fuse, light it, and run. And here is the part that is hard to believe. Lockport was the first place in American history where drilling and blasting were done at the scale of modern quarrying. The workers had no helmets, no safety glasses, no shoring against loose rock above the cut. Men were killed by flying stone. Men were killed by premature detonations when a piece of flint in the rock struck a spark against the drill bit. Men lost eyes. Men were buried when the walls of the cut collapsed. The exact death toll at Lockport is not known, because the records of it burned in a Buffalo warehouse fire in 1844, but eyewitness accounts put it above 500 for that 3-mile section alone. The second man I want you to know about worked that cut. His name was Michael Kearney. Age 34, born in County Cork, came to America in 1816 with a wife named Mary and 2 small children. He had been a stonemason in Ireland. He hired on at Lockport in the spring of 1823 as a powderman. He set charges. He was good at it. The foreman noted in the payroll that Kearney was trusted to calculate his own powder loads, which was unusual, because most powdermen worked to the foreman's order. On July 11, 1823, a charge Michael Kearney had set failed to detonate. Under the rules of the work, a man was supposed to wait a full 20 minutes before approaching a dud. Kearney waited. He walked up to the hole to pull the fuse. The charge went off while he was standing over it. He was killed instantly, along with a laborer named Sean Flaherty, who was clearing rubble 10 feet away. The contractor paid Mary Kearney $25 and the last week of her husband's wages. She moved to Rochester, took in laundry, and raised the 2 children alone. One of the boys later worked the canal as a boat captain. He lived to be 74. Every few miles along the finished canal, if you know where to look, there is a stone with a cross on it and a name almost worn away. Most of the Irish workers who died were buried near where they fell. The contractor did not have a budget for hauling bodies. The men who survived marked the spots as best they could, often with a small cairn of quarry stone. And on October 26, 1825, the canal was finished. 8 years, 3 months, and 22 days after DeWitt Clinton had driven that first ceremonial shovel into the dirt at Rome. Clinton himself, now in his second term as governor, boarded a packet boat called the Seneca Chief at Buffalo. They fired a cannon. A mile down the line, the next battery fired when they heard the first shot. Then the next. Then the next. A chain of cannon shots relayed the news from Buffalo to New York City in about 81 minutes. That was the fastest any piece of information had ever traveled on the North American continent. Clinton rode the Seneca Chief the entire 363 miles, 9 days on the boat. When he reached New York Harbor on November 4th, he carried with him 2 wooden casks of Lake Erie water. He poured them into the Atlantic Ocean in a ceremony they called the Wedding of the Waters. Crowds lined the battery, cannons fired from the forts, newspapers in Paris and London picked up the story within a month. Here is what the canal did. I've run the numbers 3 different ways, and they come out the same. Before the canal, moving a ton of freight from Buffalo to New York cost about $100. After the canal, it cost $5. A 95% reduction in shipping cost, overnight. A farmer in Ohio could now send wheat to New York for less than it cost him to send it to New Orleans down the Mississippi. The geography of American commerce flipped on its head. New York City, which had been the 3rd largest port in America behind Philadelphia and Boston, became the first. It passed them both in 10 years and never gave back the lead. The population of New York doubled between 1825 and 1835. Buffalo, which had been a burned-out frontier village after the War of 1812, became one of the fastest-growing cities in the country. Rochester went from a cluster of cabins to a flour milling capital with 20,000 people. Syracuse rose up around the salt works at the canal's middle point. Utica, Schenectady, Troy. Every one of them fed by the ditch, and beyond New York itself, the canal opened the Midwest. Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and Michigan filled up with settlers who could not have afforded to go west without a way to get their produce back east. Chicago did not exist in 1820. By 1850, because of the canal and the grain trade it unlocked, Chicago was on its way to becoming the second city in America. The entire interior of the continent was stitched to the Atlantic economy by 363 miles of water 4 feet deep, dug by Irishmen with short-handled spades. One more thing before I finish. Please, if you've stayed with me, subscribe. You have made it farther than most. This channel is about the men whose names are falling off the stones. I'll keep finding them as long as you tell the algorithm you want me to. And here is the last part. The part I come back to whenever I drive Route 31 through upstate New York, which runs parallel to the old canal line for most of its length. The canal is still there, most of it. The original ditch was widened and deepened twice in the 19th century, then enlarged again in 1918 into what is now the New York State Barge Canal, and then mostly abandoned as a commercial route when the railroads and the trucks took over in the 1950s. But the water is still there, the locks are still there, some of them the original cut stone from 1823. The towpath is now a bike trail in most sections. You can walk from Albany to Buffalo on it. It takes about 3 weeks. Along the way, you pass the old lock chambers. Some are in active use, some are stranded in the trees. Stone walls 20 feet high, rising out of second-growth forest, with nothing connected to them anymore because the line was rerouted in 1918. You can stand at the bottom of one of those abandoned locks and look up and see the chisel marks from 1823. Still there, straight and true. A man named William or Duncan or Michael cut that stone by hand in the rain, and nobody wrote his name down, and the stone is still holding. DeWitt Clinton died in 1828, 3 years after the canal opened. He was 58 years old. He was in his office in Albany working on another project, collapsed at his desk, and was gone before the doctor reached the room. His estate was bankrupt. He had spent his own money on the canal fights over the years, and he had never been a rich man. His widow could not afford a funeral, and friends paid for it. They buried him with a simple stone in New York City. The state of New York did not put up a proper monument to him for many years after. Benjamin Wright went on to be called the father of American civil engineering. James Geddes kept surveying into his 70s. Canvas White, who gave the country its hydraulic cement, died in his mid-40s of the same swamp fever that killed so many of the diggers he had worked beside. 363 miles, 83 locks, 9,000 men, 1,000 buried in the Montezuma swamps, and no one knows exactly how many at Lockport. 95% reduction in shipping cost. The making of New York City. The opening of the American interior. 8 years and 3 months of work. 80 cents a day and a ration of whiskey. I put my hand on the stone at the old Lockport flight. I've walked the towpath near the Montezuma Refuge, where the water still runs black and the mosquitoes still rise at dusk. There's no plaque there for Patrick Donnelly, no marker for Michael Kearney, just the ditch they dug and the water that runs in it, and the country that was built because they cut it through the forest with their hands. That was the Erie Canal, 1817 to 1825. Dug with shovels and wheelbarrows by men whose names are mostly gone, for a country that had no idea what it was about to become. I'm glad you stayed with me. Tell me in the comments if one of your own people worked the canal or the ditches or the stone. I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one.